Steamboat was one of the most famous bucking horses of the American West, unrideable by any cowboy who dared to try. His image became legendary in Wyoming, where his silhouette still adorns the state license plates and official seal, enduring symbol of the wild and untamable spirit of the American frontier. Dogs played an essential role in the culture of the Uinta Ute people of the 19th century, serving as hunting companions, camp guardians, and lifelong partners. This rare photograph from the 1870s documents the deep bond between the Ute and their animals, as central to their way of life as any other practice. In 1948, the last surviving veterans of the Battle of Little Bighorn gathered for a historic photograph. The June 1876 battle resulted in the defeat of the 7th Cavalry and the death of General Custer. Photographer Bill Grother, who captured this moment, lived until 2020, bridging 2 centuries of American history. Martha Jane Canary, known as Calamity Jane, photographed in Deadwood, South Dakota around 1876. Dressed in men's clothing and fully armed, she defied the social conventions of her time. Her fame blends fact and legend. She was a scout, messenger, and central character in the mythic history of Deadwood. This is the last known photograph of Wyatt Earp, taken on January 11, 1929. 2 days later, the legendary lawman and survivor of the OK Corral gunfight died of chronic cystitis in Los Angeles at age 80. His life spanned the era of the Wild West and the dawn of American modernity, becoming enduring legend. One of the final photographs of Buffalo Bill Cody, taken just days before his death on January 10, 1917. William Frederick Cody was an explorer, buffalo hunter, U.S. Army officer, and showman who created the legendary Wild West show that thrilled audiences across America and Europe for decades. A view of Deadwood in the Dakota Territory, around 1876. Founded during the Black Hills Gold Rush, Deadwood quickly became a center of mining, gambling, and violence. It was home to legendary figures such as Wild Bill Hickok, Calamity Jane, and the ruthless businessman Al Swearingen of the Gem Theater. Portrait of Sitting Bull, the great Hunkpapa Lakota spiritual leader and warrior, photographed in 1885. He led native resistance against American expansion and defeated Custer at Little Bighorn in 1876. After years of exile in Canada, he returned to the United States, where he lived as a prisoner until his death. 7 Crow chiefs pose outside a building in Montana in 1887. The Crow tribe, also known as the Apsayaluke, inhabited the vast plains of Montana. Despite tensions with the U.S. government, many Crow warriors served as scouts for the American Army, playing a crucial role in campaigns throughout the northern plains. An Apache man is photographed at the Fort Apache Reservation in White River, Arizona in 1900. The Apache resisted American expansion for decades, led by figures like Cochise and Geronimo. This documentary image captures everyday life on one of the reservations created after the end of the Apache Wars. Wyatt Earp gazes across the Colorado River toward Arizona in this 1925 photograph. The legendary lawman, who survived the OK Corral gunfight in 1881 and countless other conflicts, lived decades beyond his contemporaries, witnessing the transformation of the Wild West from lived experience into history and myth. Millie Ringgold was born into slavery and, after emancipation, migrated west to Yogo Creek, Montana, becoming a gold prospector during the 1879 rush. She challenged both racism and gender barriers of her time. Her story exemplifies the courage of Black Americans who helped shape the history of the American West. A page from Theodore Roosevelt's diary, written on Valentine's Day, February 14, 1884. On that tragic day, his young wife Alice and his mother both died within hours of each other. Roosevelt marked the date with a large X and wrote that the light had gone from his life, then departed for the Dakota Badlands. Billy the Kid, born William Henry McCarty, Jr., came into the world on November 23, 1859. He became one of the most famous outlaws of the Wild West, involved in the Lincoln County War. He is believed to have killed between 8 and 21 men before being shot by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881. A photograph of Sharpsburg, Maryland, taken in 1862 during the American Civil War. The Battle of Antietam, fought in this town on September 17, 1862, was the bloodiest single day in the entire war, with more than 22,000 casualties. The image preserves the landscape that witnessed this pivotal and devastating engagement. A photograph of Francisco Villa, the legendary Mexican revolutionary known as Pancho Villa, taken in 1912. A general of the revolutionary forces during the Mexican Revolution, Villa was feared and admired alike. In 1916, his raid on Columbus, New Mexico, provoked an American punitive expedition led by General Pershing. A Navajo mother with her children and dog photographed near Winslow, Arizona in 1912. The Navajo people, or Diné, inhabit the largest tribal territory in the United States. This documentary image captures family life on the reservation in the early 20th century between ancestral traditions and modern pressures. A young Navajo boy rides alongside a foal in Monument Valley, Arizona in 1950. Monument Valley, with its iconic sandstone buttes, lies at the heart of Navajo lands. This image evokes the profound connection of the Diné people with the land and horses, animals introduced to North America by the Spanish conquistadors. Studio portrait of Jimmy Sequent, a northern Shoshone man, photographed in Pocatello, Idaho, around 1897. The Shoshone inhabited vast areas of the Great Basin and Rocky Mountains. This formal portrait reflects the common practice of the era in documenting leaders and members of Native American nations for posterity. Dancers participate in the Cheyenne Sun Dance, around 1900 in Montana, photographed by Edward S. Curtis. The Sun Dance was one of the most sacred ceremonies of Plains peoples, banned by the U.S. government in 1883. Curtis devoted decades to documenting indigenous cultures before they were forever lost to history. Hand-colored photograph of Chief Bone Necklace of the Oglala Lakota tribe, around 1899. The Oglala were one of the 7 bands of the Lakota Sioux people, warrior horsemen of the Great Plains, who bravely resisted American expansion. The hand-coloring process lends life and dignity to this remarkable historical portrait. View of Eureka, Colorado, around 1900. Eureka was one of many mining towns that flourished in the Colorado mountains during the gold and silver rushes of the 19th century. Today it is little more than a ghost town, but at its peak it had hundreds of residents and a thriving commercial district serving the mines. Interior of Boss Caswell's Monkey Saloon in Granite, Colorado, around the early 1880s. Saloons were the social center of mining towns across the Wild West, offering drinks, gambling, and entertainment to exhausted mine workers. This establishment reflects the vibrant and rough social culture of frontier Colorado. 6 Native American leaders present at President Theodore Roosevelt's inauguration parade, photographed by Edward S. Curtis in 1905. Among them was Geronimo, the Apache leader, who marched as a symbol of a vanishing era. Their presence at the ceremony carried both the weight of celebration and profound historical sadness. Chung On, a Chinese merchandise seller, photographed in Virginia City, Montana, between 1896 and 1905. The Chinese community played a fundamental role in building the American West, particularly in railroad construction and mining. Despite harsh discriminatory laws of the era, Chinese immigrants persevered and thrived. Prospector Archie Smith poses on the porch of his cabin at Eagle Creek in Murray, Idaho in 1889. The life of a gold prospector was defined by hard labor, isolation, and the constant hope of striking it rich. Smith represents the thousands of men who abandoned everything in pursuit of wealth in the American West. On October 26, 1864, the notorious Confederate guerrilla leader, William Bloody Bill Anderson, was killed in a Union ambush in Missouri. Anderson was known for extreme brutality and led a band that included the young Jesse James. His death dealt a significant blow to Confederate guerrilla operations in the region. On December 26, 1862, in Mankato, Minnesota, the largest mass execution in United States history took place. 38 Dakota warriors were hanged simultaneously. The execution followed the Dakota War of 1862, in which hundreds of settlers were killed. President Lincoln personally reviewed and reduced the original death sentences. Wild Bill Hickok photographed in Springfield, Missouri in 1864 before his legendary fame as a gunfighter. James Butler Hickok became one of the most celebrated men of the Wild West, serving as a lawman, scout, and professional gambler. He was murdered in Deadwood in 1876 while playing poker, holding aces and eights. The first house built on the site of what would become Dodge City, Kansas, erected in August of 1872. Dodge City grew rapidly along the railroad line to become the leading cattle trade center in the country, as well as one of the most violent towns of the Wild West, eventually tamed by lawmen like Wyatt Earp. In Death Valley during the 1870s, wagons pulled by teams of 20 mules transported borax across the arid Great Basin desert to the railroad. This extraordinary logistical operation opened the region to mineral exploitation and became a symbol of human tenacity in the face of one of North America's most hostile environments. A chuck wagon at a Texas roundup around 1900. Chuck wagons were essential elements on long cattle drives across the plains, feeding the crews of cowboys. The camp cook was one of the most respected figures among trail hands, responsible for keeping everyone fed and morale high during grueling weeks on the trail. Bat Masterson, age 23, and Wyatt Earp, age 28, photographed together in Ford County, Kansas, around 1876. Both became legendary lawmen of the Wild West. Masterson and Earp worked together in Dodge City, where they kept one of the most violent frontiers in America relatively under control through reputation and resolve. Two Apsayaluke warriors from the Crow tribe on horseback outside a teepee in a snow-covered forest in Montana, 1908. The Crow were renowned horsemen of the plains and skilled warriors. This documentary image captures the continuation of their traditions even decades after the establishment of reservations in Montana. A Texas cowboy with boots decorated with Southern Plains Indian beadwork, Kiowa or Comanche style, along with spurs, a knife, and a revolver, around 1870. The cowboy figure incorporated influences from diverse cultures, including Mexican horsemanship techniques and indigenous ornamental traditions, a unique frontier synthesis. Wyatt Earp photographed in 1923 at age 75. The legendary lawman survived decades of conflicts in the Wild West, including the gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881. In his old age, Earp lived in Los Angeles and collaborated with filmmakers and writers, attempting to capture his extraordinary and turbulent life for posterity. Two Navajo horsemen near the base of Shiprock in New Mexico in 1914. Shiprock is a sacred formation for the Navajo people called Tse Bitai, meaning the rock with wings. This photograph documents everyday Navajo life in an era of transition between traditional ways and the growing influence of American institutions. Photograph of the prominent Oglala chiefs, American Horse and Red Cloud, taken by John C. H. Grabble in 1891 in South Dakota. Red Cloud was one of the most influential Native leaders, the only chief to win a war against the U.S. government, forcing the signing of the Fort Laramie Treaty on his terms in 1868. Chief Hunkpapa Sitting Bull and his nephew One Bull, photographed by Palmquist and Juergens in 1884. Sitting Bull was both a spiritual leader and a warrior, and he embodied Lakota resistance against American expansion. He led the forces that defeated Custer at Little Bighorn and was killed by Indian police in 1890. Interior of a saloon in Prescott, Arizona, around 1900. Wild West saloons were social centers where men drank, played poker, conducted business, and settled disputes. Prescott, capital of the Arizona Territory, had a reputation as a lively and relatively orderly town by frontier standards, drawing all manner of characters. A cowboy seated in front of the BT Ranch building in Missouri in 1887. Missouri ranchers represented a link between the more settled East and the still rugged West. This image captures the relaxed daily life of rural workers who formed the backbone of the American agricultural economy in the post-Civil War era. Jim Bridger, the famous mountain man and explorer, photographed around 1876. Bridger was one of the greatest experts on the American West, having explored the Rocky Mountains, Yellowstone, and the Great Salt Lake. He served as a guide, trapper, and fort builder, becoming one of the most legendary figures of the frontier. Navajo horsemen crossed the desert of Canyon de Chelly, Arizona, in 1904. Canyon de Chelly is a sacred place for the Navajo people, where their ancestors lived for centuries and where Kit Carson conducted the devastating 1864 campaign. This image evokes the Navajos' intimate relationship with this monumental landscape. Two Flathead Indians, also known as Salish, on horseback in Montana in 1899. The Salish people inhabited the rich forests and valleys of northwestern Montana. Skilled horsemen and traders, they maintained complex relationships with settlers and the American government throughout the turbulent 19th century. Men in a tavern in Southern California around 1890. Taverns and saloons of the American West served as meeting points for miners, cowboys, merchants, and adventurers of every background. Contrary to the violent image popularized by cinema, many of these establishments were actually relatively peaceful gathering places. Studio portrait of an unidentified Ute man, photographed in Denver, Colorado, between 1861 and 1870. The Ute people inhabited the Rocky Mountains and Colorado Plateau for thousands of years before the arrival of Europeans. This formal portrait reflects the photographic practice of the era in documenting indigenous Americans. Portrait of a young Spokane brave, photographed in Seattle, Washington, between 1895 and 1899. The Spokane tribe inhabited the banks of the Spokane River in what is now Washington State. Like many indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, the Spokane depended on salmon fishing and extensive trade networks. Chief Little Soldier, leader of one of the bands of the northwestern Utah Shoshone, photographed around 1869. The Shoshone inhabited vast regions of the Great Plains and Rocky Mountains. Sacagawea, who guided the Lewis and Clark expedition, was Shoshone, bringing their people enduring fame in American historical memory. Chief Hunkpapa Sitting Bull, dressed in full traditional regalia, photographed by David F. Barry around 1880. This is one of the most iconic images of the Lakota leader. Sitting Bull was revered not only as a warrior, but as a prophet and visionary who foretold the victory over Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Looking Glass, war chief of the Nez Perce, photographed in 1877, the year he led his people on an epic flight of more than 1,500 miles toward Canada. He was killed at the Battle of Bear Paw, just 40 miles from the Canadian border, where Chief Joseph finally surrendered to the United States Army in October 1877.